Ali, welcome to the Sonya Barlow Show. We are filming here live from the Maldives at Kagi Hotel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to have an introduction as to who you are and what you do at Kagi Hotels.
Yeah. So I am from Champa Resorts. I work with the sales and marketing department. So we have about 5 resorts in our luxury collection, Kagi being the third one. It's a 5-star property. We try to promote Kagi as a resort where you can come and relax and rejuvenate and just unwind, disconnect from the outside world and from the hustle and bustle and just have a relaxing, wonderful holiday with your loved one and with your family.
Did you always see yourself working in the hospitality industry, especially being Maldivian?
Well, being a Maldivian, yes. I thought at some point I might end up in a resort because this is like the dominant economy. The most money coming to the country is through tourism.
Absolutely.
We used to have fishing, but fishing is a small segment, right? So this was not part of the plan. I just stumbled upon it. It's just happenstance, circumstances. I was just a graduate student. I was studying my degree, and then back in the day, Crown and Champa Resorts they had a program for graduate management training program. So they scouted all the colleges and handpicked students, like top students from these colleges. So coming from the lowest rung all the way up to a regional sales manager level was quite the experience. Then it happened within a span of 10 years. So this is actually my first job. I started, I've done some small jobs after I finished school, but I'm quite independent. I'm open to opportunities. Right? When the opportunity presented itself, I decided it's time for me to take this step and see where it leads me. So.
And it's really interesting because you've made that point twice now. First, when we spoke about the podcast, we said, yes, there's a lot of young professionals or professionals who are stuck, confused, want to get started, who'd be watching this thinking, how do you have that self-confidence to say yes to an opportunity when you don't know the outcome? What is your advice to them?
That's a really good question. How I look at this, just you have to look at it in a different framework, right? Unless you try something, you wouldn't really understand how the outcome is going to be. But you have seen that daring to try things and to be arduous and be willing enough to take on different challenges in your life, you're never going to improve yourself as a person. That's what I believe. And through listening to podcasts and watching interviews where leaders, they give accounts of how they came about. They started from the very bottom and they've taken all the opportunities they came across, and without even giving it a moment's thought, they jumped into it, and then everything worked out just well. I think it's important that instead of being having so much, like, you just have to detach yourself from all that negativity and relinquish all those negative thoughts about how it's going to turn out. If you have your self-confidence, you always have to believe in yourself, right? You have to believe in yourself that you have the capability and you are competent enough. If you believe that, then you just have to go to the next step and work it out. But you know all the theory already. You have listened to enough podcasts, you know the theory. Now you need to practically apply it in real life.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm doing right at this moment, actually.
Absolutely. But then extending on that, one thing that is interesting right now, especially in the world of social media and the internet, is people confusing kind of luxury with pretentious or self-success, self-promotion with boasting, or being, affirmative with being aggressive. I guess the point being is, a lot of the time we're so caught up in what other people feel and people think about us, the perceptions, that we're not willing to take a risk on ourselves. Those perceptions are going to keep changing and people are going to keep thinking what they think about you. How do you negate yourself from, or distance yourself from what others believe and who you really want to become?
I was in a very fortunate enough position to start from the very bottom, so I understand what it's like to work from the very lowest rungs. So I have done front office jobs. I have worked in the front line. I have worked with in F&B departments, serving tables. I've done all of that. So I don't have that elite mindset, that I am someone who is above everyone. So I don't put myself on a pedestal, right? Because I've started from the very bottom and understand that. And then even though I am I'm in a luxury position, right? And this is a luxury resort and promoting a luxury resort to the world out there, I always think of myself as I'm very humble. I always meet people and I try to extract some information out of them. Not in a selfish way, but the thing is, I know that there's some things which I can learn from people that I meet. I think from the very beginning, as my parents, that's what they taught me. And also, I think anyone who was out there embarking on a journey like that, the most important thing is, even if you reach the level that you want, you always have to remember where you started, your beginning. That should humble you, right? Because not everyone is fortunate enough to start not everyone is born with the silver spoon in their mouth. Some people has to work really hard to achieve those things, right? And when you achieve those things, you have to be proud of yourself. And at the same time, you also have to be humble enough, and you have to understand that not everyone comes from the same beginning, right?
Absolutely.
So
storytelling people's career journeys and understanding where they've started and the effort they've put in is really interesting. You spoke about the fact that you say yes to opportunities and you're keeping on learning, especially in this industry where you're talking to so many people. What are some top tips when it comes to networking or starting a new conversation?
Well, you have to operate within a certain perimeter, right? You have to stick to the subject that you're discussing, right? Sometimes you have to be discreet with certain things that you cannot go much into details. There are certain subjects that you know not enough about, then you shouldn't really talk about those subjects. So I have to have the experience and I have to know to research the subject enough to be able to talk about it. So what I do is I listen to podcasts that are quite interesting and I use snippets out of it and then use that as a conversation starter to break the ice with people. So while we are doing all these events, when we have meetings with tour operators, normally we will just not dive right into business talks. We'll just casually start up, just have some small talks about some things and then slowly, gradually move the subject out from that and into the business talk. So there's a way that you have to approach, and these are things that I've learned after joining the company and from my mentors. Every day I have to talk with different people over the phone and doing Teams meetings and presentations, and then in a way that I'm also always learning something new about myself and at the same time about the products, because the way they formulate those questions, right? So it makes me think, makes me want to, like, next time when I'm prepared to answer those questions.
Absolutely.
First time when you're going in, you're not really sure how it's going to turn out, but once it's done, once it's concluded, then you kind of have an understanding that how it's going to be next time. So over time, you learn these things, and then you are better prepared next time.
I did a reel a couple of weeks ago where I said one thing that traveling has really taught me is how to have cross-culture communication and adapt your style. So a good example being when I was doing consultancy work for a business venture, I traveled Europe for 6 weeks. And I remember the same presentation took 3.5 days in Italy and took 3 hours in Prague. Because in Prague, they wanted to get straight to it. They wanted to know the facts and they wanted to reflect on the answers. In Italy, they were far more open to having longer discussions, having, fruitful breaks and making it a whole event. Similarly, I found that in the Maldives, or kind of, certain parts of Asia at least, individuals don't like to get straight into business. They want to talk about their family, their friends, their lifestyle. Whereas when you compare it to maybe somewhere like Germany, they don't really want too much kind of talk or small talk at the front. They want to get to it. They want to be quite efficient and move up. That's some examples I can provide when it comes to networking or communicating across cultures and continents even. Can you give us some examples of what you found, be that in your current role or be that in the kind of traveling space altogether?
So while we are having discussions online or we are doing a product review or product training, then I always have to know the audience, right? You have to understand where they are coming from, which country. There are certain subjects which you cannot discuss, might be a sensitive subject. I'll give you one example. Like if you're talking about some country, say in Europe or let's say in Russia, you cannot really say that this is something which is very popular in the US, in the Western society, because you kind of have to understand the audience. You have to tweak the subject matter.
Absolutely.
Slightly tweak the subject matter, but deliver it in a way which is appealing to them. So this is something which I always keep in mind. And also my mentors, they always tell me that after a presentation, before you go in, understand who you are going to talk to, understand the audience, and then prepare yourself how you're going to deliver the content.
And tell me a moment where maybe it hasn't been successful, or you failed, or you've made a mistake, and how have you overcome that first kind of the mental, blockage that comes with it, and then the embarrassment.
That's the thing, if you don't make mistakes, you're never going to learn from it, right? I always thought that, okay, if I do a presentation, or if I'm going to have a sit-down interview with someone, like the one we're having now, I'm going to stumble on my words, or I'm not be able to string two sentences together. I'm going to make myself look like a fool. I always have these negative thoughts. Even before coming into the interview, I was rehearsing the rehearsal. How am I going to go to the interview? But then I just told myself, I have to stop thinking and just learn how to think on my feet. Just shut your brain for a while and let the words flow out. So that's what I started doing. So if you start thinking too much about what you're going to say next, then you're going to end up making a lot of mistakes. But these are mistakes that is necessary for you to go to the next level. So I believe that if you have to allow yourself to make those mistakes, hundreds of mistakes, because in the end, you're just learning something new every time you make a mistake. So that's the approach. And I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I'm really not. So the reason why I agreed to do this interview is also because this is something I have never done in my life before. You only live once, right? You just have to try everything.
Absolutely.
We are multivariant.
Absolutely. And for kind of the audience that listens, I just want to caveat that this was an interview that was proposed by myself and my team. We most definitely were hoping for a yes, but often, more times than not, sometimes, you get a no, and that's completely fine. So we came with a plan, we came with a proposal, we came with some ideas and questions, and we had a coffee and dinner last night just to warm up and get to know one another, which the reason I bring that into the space is if you want to go out and do something new, or you want to, be on someone's radar, or you want to get some time in the diary with somebody, I don't think you should ever just expect the yes to come straight away. It's the foundation setting and maybe, small things that are significant that you can do beforehand to make the other person feel comfortable, right? Because you, from what it seems like, are curious and you're learning and you're willing to commit to a new task to level yourself up. Not everybody is that brave or that confident or that kind of able to take risks. You also speak about the many mentors that you learn from and the podcasts that you learn from. Do you have any recommendations of podcasts or books that you think have kind of been quite significant in your career journey or your mindset transformation?
Well, my favorite podcast is Joe Rogan, because the fact that Joe Rogan interviews people from different facets of life. So you get to be like a fly on the wall and listen to these interesting conversations, and you end up learning a lot of some new stuff. And then you can actually implement those new stuff that you learn in the daily conversations that you have, which is very important for me in my line of work. Philosophy books, I love reading philosophy. Marcus Aurelius' Meditation, I recommend that book. And Robert Greene's, and then also Rand Holiday's. So these are several. There's so many books. It's difficult to just pinpoint and exactly say which books you should read. But you have to find what is where your interest lies, and there are so many books written on the subject that you can explore on your own, right? But to talk about books, normally people they ask for book recommendations, but they don't really read the books. They're just asking for book recommendations, right? It's kind of become a vanity metric. People want to post stuff that they read online because they want to signal. It's signaling, right?
Super interesting that you raised that point.
Yeah, it's just virtue signal. They want to signal to the outside world that they are reading these books. But if you want to read something that you read it, then if you feel like that you have done reading, you don't have to necessarily finish all the book. You just switch to another book. That's how I go about life. About reading books and listening to podcasts. I don't necessarily stick to one book or necessarily finish one book. I just find the ideas from that book that is interesting to me, and then I'm good, because you're never gonna remember the whole 400 pages of the book anyway. So I actually started listening to audiobooks on Blinkist because it serves 400, 500 pages books in a much more digestible format.
Absolutely.
An audiobook which maybe about 5 hours is condensed down to 20 minutes, but you get all the key points from that. So these are the necessary things like that. That way you will save time, and also
I mean, what I'm also taking away from you is be quite efficient with your time and your learning.
Yes, yeah.
Is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing here, even to go on Blinkist, and I'm a fan of Blinkist because about a year ago, my book was actually Book of the Day on Blinkist. So Unprepared to Entrepreneurs. So very exciting for me that you referenced that. But equally, the point being is, don't be afraid to put something down. Don't be afraid to pick something up. Don't be afraid to talk to people, to learn from them. Don't be afraid to use tools and technology and AI and, summary sites just to get the key learnings. But what I'm constantly hearing you saying is once you've learnt the theory, go and practice. It's really important to practice.
It's really important because you can sit here with all your thoughts, right? And if you don't put those thoughts out, and if you don't, like, as I'm speaking, I am learning stuff. And this conversation, it will benefit me in retrospect because then I will look back and it resonates, right? Then you reflect on it, then you reassess, then this is my first interview. Then I will be much more confident in going into a second interview.
Well, we would take pride in the fact that we were your first interview. One thing that you touched on was that you are of Maldivian heritage, that you have studied in the Maldives and that you work in the Maldives, right?
Yeah.
But from what I've understood about the Maldives, you have 26 atolls and everything is quite spaced out, especially in length. The point being is, from my walking and talking around the resort, people leave home around, 18 to work, but as young as kind of 13 to study. So you live quite a life of what I would say maybe loneliness and isolation that a lot of people don't realize, right? Like from my understanding, you maybe work 2 months and then go see your family for a month and so forth. I have to say that has really enriched my understanding of the Maldives, which is, to your point, the honeymoon destination and its pretty beaches and its white sands, but the people are super committed, but they're equally lonely. How do you balance that business mindset with the loneliness that this life does actually bring and kind of, it puts on you?
Like if you work in a company long enough time, then you just develop a sense of belonging to that company. Like even though we are separated from our families, it's not very difficult for us to travel, because traveling within the Maldives is quite easy. That you have domestic airlines, you have speedboat transfers regularly scheduled, so it's not that difficult. And as for lonely, I've never felt that way, because I'm quite independent from the from starting grade school. I moved to the city because I wanted to pursue a different stream. I wanted to study science because back then in my home island, the school, they had only one stream, which was business. So I didn't want to study business. So in order for me to study science, I had to travel. So I left home alone and I studied in a school in Male. And then ever since that, after finishing school, then I've always been on my own, and I kind of like that. You feel the sense of independency, and then you can like choose your own path, which path you want to choose. Because you're not really indoctrinated in a certain way, or you're not like to believe societal norms or in a certain to subscribe to a certain belief system in that way. So you find your own way around. And you figure out, as long as you're not doing something wrong, it's still not causing anyone any harm. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So this is kind of how I have, and I've always been very, very quite open to learning new things and being independent. And I've never really, personally for me, maybe there are others who might feel differently about this, because some people are a little bit more family oriented because they spend their whole life with their families, grown up with mom and dad. Me, I had a very different upbringing, so I was always very quiet. And I always thought of myself, even my parents to this day, they will say that I always talk to them about, I wanted to become someone great. I want to grow up to become someone important. Like that has always been in the back of my mind, So I think this belief system that was instilled in me as a child has led me to this point in my life, I had a very different perspective on life. I wanted to become a pilot. This was the reason why I wanted to, study science, because physics apparently is very important. You want to pursue a career in aeroflights. But then Maldives is actually, especially people who are living in the home islands, they don't have the kind of capacity or the capability to send their children abroad to study. Not every Maldivian has that. So this is also one reason why a lot of youngsters, 18 years old, as soon as they turn 18, they leave the home, they come to a resort because it pays well. And then we also find like a lot of Maldivians who has started working at the age of 18, and they build their career all the way up, and then they start up their own business in their home, like a corner shop, a convenience store, or they build a guest house or something like that. They go into business. So when they are working such in a young age, right? So they immediately they have to, it's like there's no one to really, like parents, they're sort of out of the picture now, so they have to find their own way. They have to learn how to be inside uh, a company and to learn how to get along with everyone else, because different people come from different backgrounds. In Maldives, it's a very multicultural environment in the resorts. We have a lot of foreigners because we need native speakers for Germany, Russia, Italy, France. So guests who are coming from these countries, they like it if there is someone who can speak their own language, right? So we have native speakers mostly working in the guest services department. So you kind of have to learn how to navigate. You just have to find the trajectory of life. You have to find your own way. So these are things that will not be taught in schools. This is something that you have to learn when you are in your job. That's how even I, and kind of it made me realize that I have a lot of work to do, because most of my colleagues are foreigners. So the everyday language in our office is English. There are a few Maldivians working, and the rest are all from the foreign countries. We have from South Africa, we have from China, we have from Morocco, from different parts of the world. So they all speak one common language, English. So I had to level up myself in order to be able to hold a conversation with them, right? So this is kind of things when you realize that there's a gap of knowledge, then you sort of, it's all about you. You just have to have that interest, and you have to have a vested interest in your own self on how you can improve in order to combat these areas where you are lacking. So that's how I just explored on my own, watched YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, and the main purpose for me was to learn how to speak, how to communicate, and I learned quite a lot from listening to podcasts. I'd say I've been listening to podcasts for more than now 8 years.
Wow.
A long time.
So would you say Maldivians are more independent and lonely?
They're more independent than lonely.
Yeah, so they're more independent than kind of isolated and lonely, which is a really cool and interesting point, right? And I say that because I have spent the last year doing as much research as I can about the Maldives and where to stay and where to travel and what to do. But one reason as to why I wanted to interview yourself or kind of speak to the locals is because I want to understand the local life and local culture. It's one thing to come and stay in a beautiful resort. It's another thing to understand the culture which surrounds it, right? Because also this is a kind of a temporary facade, right? It's real, but it's also not real. Because in some ways it's not a local island.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's catered for the audience. And the audience are professionals with net worth and disposable income who want to recharge and relax, who might be running a business or might be, just busy in their everyday lives. And they want to come here and just have a sense of well-being. So what are some of your favorite kind of, takes from the Maldivian culture, customs, from the culture that you are happy to share with us?
Maldives would be a very different destination if tourism wasn't introduced in the year 1972. That was the year Maldives was first introduced to the country, and it was one journalist from Italy who came to visit, and then he saw the Maldives, the beauty of it, and he went back and brought more journalists, a group of people, and they wrote about it, and it sort of spread like wildfire. Everyone found out about Maldives and it started coming, and there was a need, and we didn't have back then. There was no facilities where we can accommodate tourists because they eat certain type of food. We can get fish from the sea and coconut. That's like the base ingredient for everything that we make here. But I heard, just take it with a grain of salt. But because someone told me the story that when the Italians first came to the country, they brought pasta with them.
Yeah.
And they made pasta, and we brought fish from the ocean, and we sort of
Understood.
Yeah, put it together. So that's how it came about. I'm saying that Maldives is a very hospitable country. We are a very hospitable nation, and everyone here is, you can see if you meet any Maldivians, they are very friendly. They're also smiling. This is what we teach. This is all also based on our upbringing and our culture. There's a lot to do with that. And also, when you come to a resort like this, we always say that you have to be polite. You have to present yourself in a nice way. You have to be smiling, because these are our guests, and we have to be, we are in a very fortunate position to have these guests come to visit us, because this is what's enabling us to win our bread.
And my final question, bringing it back to you, your career journey the fact that, you know, you are of Maldivian heritage, you're quite proud and you're working in a space that maybe you didn't originally seek out to work in, but it teaches on your learning, your curiosity, it plays in your communication. What do you think that you've learned about yourself in the last 10 years since you've said yes to a graduate role and you had no idea where it's going to take you, and now 10 years later you've said yes to an interview and you have no idea where it's going to take you?
I have no idea where it's going to take me, but I always believed in making incremental progress, and through progress you're going to achieve those things. But if you limit your belief system, and if you constrain yourself to operate within a certain parameter, and if you don't believe that there is a world outside of yourself, outside of your immediate vision, and if you have the gumption and the capability and the competence to go out there and explore, then you have to do these things. And that is how you're going to improve. So this is strictly what I believe. And I've always, like I said, when I was a child, I always tell my parents, one day I want to grow up to become an important man, important person, and I want to be an affluent member of the society. You know, so this is how I think this is what I have been conditioned myself, and I think this is what I have been doing. So I think, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years from now, maybe I will be doing talks in front of live audience, giving motivational stuff. Who knows? You know, anything can be possible. So I'm open to any kind of possibilities. Whatever present itself, I'm willing to say yes, if it's going to take me to the next level.
A few things that I've learned from this conversation: one, say yes and figure it out as you go along. Understand your capabilities and your skills and pair them to your strengths rather than focus on your weaknesses. It's important to make mistakes and learn from your failures. If you don't have the relevant people around you, be that friends, society, or even the network, don't be afraid to seek that network, be that through online mediums, be that through connecting with people who come through resorts or starting conversations. And ultimately, curiosity, communication, learning, those are three important skills for, you know, to take you from point A to point B, whilst you are no doubt improving yourself incrementally along the way.
Yeah.
That is kind of what we have summed up. And of course, we've spoken about the Kagi Resort, which is where we're staying, the Crown and Champa group, which is where you're working, and generally the culture of Maldives, which I think is really important to storytell. So on that note, I would love it if you could give us a reference to how people can stay connected with you and where they can find you before we end this discussion.
So I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. So these are just only two platforms that I use. And if you're interested in learning more about Crown and Champa Resorts, we have our own brand website. Also, if you follow us on Instagram and on LinkedIn, our presence is very strong. And also, one fact about Crown and Champa Resort is that we are the largest local hospitality group in the Maldives. Yeah, so it's a local group, and all our resorts are 100% natural, and we have a vested interest in sustainability. This day and age with the global climate changes, so we are very cautious about the fact that if there is a need for that, so we are doing a lot of sustainable approaches. We have a different view, so we just want to keep the Maldives as natural as we possibly can for the next generation to come.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'm sure that in our next visit to the Maldives, we will touch on all of these points that you've raised and do a lot with the Crown and Champa Resort. So thank you.
Thanks so much.